There is absolutely no way that a bike with 190mm travel on both ends can go uphill well, let alone be the best climbing e-bike that I've ever ridden. Well, the Pole Voima would like to disagree with that. Join me along in this video for its long-term review and learn all about it. The Voima is Finnish brand Pole's first e-bike, and rather than just plug in a Bosch motor into something they had lying around already, they decided to design a whole new frame, a new suspension system, and create a bike that is truly unique with some unique geometry and handling characteristics too. The frame is manufactured from aluminium. It's CNC machined in two halves and then bonded together in the middle to create a really unique look. You can still see the lines from the machine in there, but it plays to Pole's more eco-friendly motives, so the material can be recycled continuously. There's less waste from manufacture. There's anything that's lost in the machining process is then recycled. And yeah, because it's manufactured in Finland, in Europe as well, they save on shipping, carbon footprint and stuff like that as well. So all around, a little bit more of an eco-friendly approach to it. The frame is then electrophoretically coated. It's a process that is sort of along the lines of anodizing, but it applies it goes about it a little bit differently, and you end up with a very thin, like sub 10 micron, almost human hair thickness of coating on the frame, which should protect it against scratches and keep it from going dull as it would do normally. It's a clear coat on the raw finish that I was testing, but they also offer a storm grey and a true gold sort of colorway on there as well, if you don't like the beautiful raw silver that I've got beside me. As mentioned, this is an e-bike with 190mm travel on both ends. It's got a pair of 29-inch wheels, and for this bike they developed their own Sensei suspension system. It's a dual-link suspension system, sort of like your VPP sort of style, but the shock is driven off of a link that goes off of the upper pivot. And it produces some pretty unique looks with that mono swing arm in the back, as well as creating some pretty unique characteristics in terms of the kinematics and the suspension performance that allowed Pole to keep the kind of pedaling performance exactly how they wanted it without compromising the performance on the descents. The Sensei suspension was given kinematics with roughly 95 to 110% anti-squat, the pedaling support through the gear range at sag. There's about 90% anti-rise, the resistance to the rear end of the chassis lifting under braking, which should preserve the geometry fairly well for steep stuff without creating too much of a firm up of the rear end under braking. And then the overall progression sits at 26%, which should allow it to play friendly with both a high volume air shock or a coil. The Pole Voima uses the Bosch Smart system with the CX Gen 4 motor, and the one that I tested had the slightly outdated now Smart system, of which there's still a few available to buy on the website, the Pole website, or they now offer their updated ID models, which shaved about 300 grams off the overall frame weight, as well as using the slightly more discreet mini remote on the bar, the wireless one, and then a nice integrated top tube display for the different modes. This is a much cleaner looking system, and certainly one that we'd recommend going for if you can, and there's not actually any price increase there. In fact, the prices have come down for the base models slightly, so you're kind of winning all around there. Pole does also offer the race model, a race spec kind of version with the Bosch CX race motor, and a few different spec choices as well to make it more targeted at the racing crowd rather than your day-to-day user. Regardless of the motor that you choose, you get a 750 watt-hour Bosch power tube battery in there. It's a removable one, so you can buy a spare second battery and then quickly swap them out if you want to go on a real all-day epic. And these batteries sit within the frame in what Pole calls a torsion box, so the frame is kind of built up around that area to increase the stiffness without too much of a weight penalty. So although it's removable, Pole says that it doesn't impact the overall performance too much, so you kind of benefit from the quick removal for easier charging or being able to extend your rides. The Voima has a number of notable features that are worth mentioning. The first one being the option choose between two different sets of axles for that Sensei rear suspension, between a standard and a race axle. So the standard one is designed to give a little bit more flex and compliance in the rear end, or then the race axle can be upgraded for a little bit more stiffness and direct feel. There's room in the front triangle for two water bottles, two large water bottles, so your hydration needs or carrying accessories is super well covered. There's an optional PE slider that goes underneath the motor to keep your motor safe and prevent it from getting damaged if you go over obstacles. And Pole offers a full frame protection kit, which can be added to the raw version or comes as standard on the Storm Grey or True Gold to keep that frame looking fresher. And it's a really nice kind of custom made one, so it fits all the contours and gives you very good coverage. The geometry on pole bikes continues to be fairly unique, but certainly not quite as extreme looking these days as it once was. They use a K sizing system as opposed to small, medium, large. So you've got K1 through to K4, which is roughly equivalent to a small to an extra large, which suits riders between 160 centimeters and up to and over 195 centimeters. These all use a pair of 29-inch wheels, but have reach triggers that go between 450 mil all the way up to 535 mil, so this really caters to the taller riders out there. Consistent across all the sizes are a 63.5 degree head angle, an 80 degree seat tube angle, and a 455 mil chainstay. The bottom bracket is notably higher, on paper at least, than most, sitting directly in line with the axles at 0 mil BB drop. But of course, remember it's got 190 mil travel, so once you're sagged, it starts to catch up with slightly shorter travel bikes. Then you've got pretty high stack heights that start at 635 mil on the K1 and then go up to 648 mil for the bigger sizes. And I decided, with the size range covering such a wide span and also my preference for slightly shorter bikes, especially when we're talking about e-bikes, to go for the K2. This has a 480 millimeter reach, a 648 millimeter stack height, a very low 360 mil seat tube length, so even with the 200 mil dropper there, I've got loads hanging out of the frame, and a resulting very stretched out 1,313 millimeter wheelbase. So this is certainly still, for a K2 or roughly a medium, a very long bike, but it doesn't prove to be too much of a handful in most situations, which we'll get onto in a bit. There's a lot of different options when speccing up your Pole Voima, with standard builds starting from about 5,500 euros or $6,000, and then going up much higher than that if you decide to spec it out. The build that I tested was roughly equivalent to an $8,000 build or so now. It's no longer available, so I won't go into the details too much. But certainly it had a nice and purposeful build spec on there that was up to a lot of punishment. It came in at a weight of about 25.5 kilos or 56 pounds, so certainly not a lightweight bike, but with 190 mil travel on both ends, I think it's kind of important to spec it out with nice and burly components. The one standout thing that was not so good about the spec on this and is no longer on the bike was the Mavic ED Max 30 wheels. They just aren't quite up to the kind of abuse that a 190 mil travel bike can be subjected to, so I swapped them out quickly for a set of Hope Pro 5e wheels with their 4-30 rims, which were much more up to the task and improved the ride experience all around for more aggressive riding. That said, those standard ED Max wheels may be a nice and compliant option for the lighter riders or those not pushing the bike quite so hard. So don't rule them out totally, but just especially if you're in the higher weight class, then certainly try and spec something a little bit more stiff. Now let's talk about how the Pole Voima rides. From the get-go, it's a super interesting bike, there's no denying that. It really catches everyone's eye, from the kind of striking machine finish, sideways mounted shock, the mono swing arm, everything is just, there's nothing really super normal about this bike, both in how it looks and also how it rides. Getting it set up is quite easy. It's not a fussy bike. There's a huge sag window. I think you could run it anywhere from 25 to 35% sag quite happily. I had a brief chat with Leo from Pole, the CEO, the founder, the engineer, who was happy to talk me through how you get it set up right. And basically there's no right answer. You can set it up one day with 25% sag out back for a more trail feeling, and then if you're going into some really rough and rowdy terrain where you want the most stability and comfort, set it up with 35%, and you're still not going to be hitting the bottom out bumper all too frequently because of the progressive kinematic. So it's certainly an interesting bike. For me, I found that going slightly on the stiffer side felt to be a little bit better. I found that if you run it on the softer side, you lose a lot of the feedback that I at least prefer to have from the trail, that lets me get the control and feel what's happening under my tires and getting the grip. But there's no doubting that with more sag and a softer setup, it was just pure, beautiful compliance, and you could charge your way down through absolutely anything without batting an eyelid in true downhill bike style, which is super cool. Climbing this bike is really kind of mind-blowing. I was expecting it to be absolute pig on the way up. It's not light, it's got 190mm travel, the angles in the wheelbase are all kind of pushing you towards thinking that it's just going to be a downhill-minded machine. But because they've spec'd it with that pretty steep seat tube angle, kinematic that's got enough support without being too crazy, everything kind of adds up to make you really nicely centered in the bike, with enough support that it's not, too soft and wallowy when you're putting in a little bit more of your physical kind of movement into the bike. But this thing will absolutely get you up anything that an e-bike is possible to get up. Especially if you've got a really nice and grippy rear tire in there, so you're not struggling for traction. The things that you can get up on this are absolutely mind-blowing. It's the equivalent of a Moto Trials bike in the way that it goes up, especially the steepest kind of terrain, but it'll deal with root steps, rocks, whatever, really nicely as well, because there's plenty of clearance because of the relatively high bottom bracket, but the way that you're centered so much in the bike, but you don't have to actively weight the front wheel at all, but you can quickly shift your weight backwards to lift the front wheel a little bit. Yeah, all around this is an absolute climbing machine. On the descents, it's quite a monster too. Obviously the geometry is very suited to flat out terrain. It's super stable, and the suspension helps a lot with that as well. It's certainly capable of eating up some really big hits. But the high bottom bracket, it's not actually unbelievably high. It's not similar to the kind of Huck bikes of years past, but it is certainly, at least on paper and a little bit in practice, higher than most. But that it gives it a slightly different feel. You have to really tip it into a turn to get the most out of it. If you don't, then you can certainly run wide. But once you get used to the handling, it's certainly not a bike that's all that afraid of tight and twisty terrain. You just have to really get used to the timing of it, and it will get you around some surprisingly tight corners. It's certainly a different philosophy, it's a different feeling, but I found that it worked pretty damn well. The only thing that it really struggles with is when it gets super tight and technical and you need to actively place the wheels exactly where you want them. Here in the Tweed Valley, there's a lot of trails where your average speed is quite slow, and there's a lot of off-camber roots and rocks that you need to really be precise and hit the patches of grip on the trail. And this thing doesn't make that easy because you've got so much travel to kind of work your way through to make an active movement, a dynamic movement on the bike. It can be quite difficult to navigate that kind of terrain, so you do end up having to back off the speed a little bit. But other than that, if you live in an area that's a little bit more wide open, or don't mind slowing down a little bit for the more tight and technical and super precision-minded trails, then this thing's an absolute animal and a super fun bike to ride aggressively. It's not a bike that you are going to be popping and playing and jibbing all the way down the trail, I wouldn't say. I hope you guys have enjoyed checking out this video. It's been a lot of fun testing this bike, and it's been really eye-opening to what a different geometry concept can be. And if you're looking for a bike that's going to go uphill incredibly well and then downhill on slightly wider open trails super fast, then this may just be the ultimate bike for you. Thank you very much for tuning in, guys. Give us a like if you've enjoyed the video. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think of this Pole Voima, and subscribe to the channel to see more awesome content on awesome bikes like this. Thank you very much for tuning in, guys. catch you out on the trails.